IVM.
Hey, welcome to Shunya 1, episode 27.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
How are you doing, Amit?
I'm doing good.
So, what's been happening on our Slack channel?
Well, we've had some interesting conversations going on. There's one thread in particular which I think our listeners would like listening. So, Bhav Kaka asked the question, do Shunya owners think that Flipkart is fighting a losing battle against Amazon? We got some replies from Vivek and myself in there, and it's turned into a pretty interesting conversation, so you guys should check that out.
Yeah, let's jump in.
Yeah.
And obviously, we have an interesting show for you today. We're going to talk to someone again from the startup space. So let's get right on.
Yep.
So today we have Jonathan Bill, founder and CEO at CreditMate. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And his Twitter handle is Johnson Bill, which is also an interesting story, which I want to hear about. But just to give you a brief, Johnson has been here for
You
more
just
than...
called him Johnson.
No, I called him Jonathan.
You just
That's
called him
okay.
Johnson.
That's okay.
And he's been here for, what, a good
7 years.
7 years now?
Yeah.
So even though you're British,
Yeah.
you've actually become Indian over the last 7 years. And I think we're going to talk a little more about your experience in India,
Sure.
both as in corporate India and as well as an entrepreneur yourself today. So welcome to the show. And yes, please tell us what Johnson Bill is all about.
So that's a kind of weird story. So I've spent some time in Egypt, and when I lived in Egypt, unfortunately in Arabic, it's very difficult for anyone to pronounce TH, so the sound. So everyone used to call me Mr. Johnson. So I changed my Twitter handle to Johnson Bill. And then, of course, I've discovered since then that in America, the Johnson is a kind of euphemism for a male appendage.
Right.
So it's fun.
Right. And does this ever come up in any Indian conversation?
Nobody ever brings anything like that up in India. India, I tend to find, is quite, polite.
Yeah.
At least,
I think Indians have their own share of Indian names which become really bad in the Americas. So I think they stay away from
second guest. Hardik.
Yeah, Hardik Pandya or
Yes.
Hardik or anyone else like that.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
I think that's why we're polite all the more.
Always.
That lest you return the favor. So great. I definitely want to hear about your story in the early days before even India, since you mentioned Egypt. You've been in the telecom sector for a large part. You were even before that in ad tech, which you mentioned, and now you're doing lending, and lending in a very unique space in India as well, when we're going through sort of a fintech hype cycle, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you've seen quite a few of those cycles take place over the course of your career. So could you tell us a bit about your background on that?
Sure. So I went to school, and then in England, you kind of go to school and do stuff that you want to do, as opposed to vocational things. In fact, when I was at Vodafone, we had a management meeting and we kind of compared our educational backgrounds. And I think if I'd been in India, I'd probably be sweeping the roads right now. But I went to school, I graduated, I got into ad sales. And this was in about 1995, and that was when the internet was just starting out, and ended up joining a very early stage company called Real Media, which had an ad tech system called Open Ad Stream.
Right.
Ran the commercial function of that business from, first...
Real Media is not a Real Player. It's a different
No,
company.
so Real Player, in fact, we had a big argument with Real Player about the domain name.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Open Ad Stream.
I think I remember this.
Yeah, Open Ad Stream was the software, and that business was acquired by WPP.
Okay.
For actually, back in those days, quite a large amount of money, nearly $1 billion.
Oh.
Which helped me pay off a couple of mortgages, but didn't let me retire. Then I ended up working for Reuters, Reuters Media. So that was again, Reuters Media was running news distribution, digital news distribution. Then ended up being headhunted into a company called Vis-a-Vis, which was a joint venture between Vodafone and Vivendi Universal. Anyway, ended up being wholly acquired by Vodafone, and ended up running Vodafone's internet business in the UK, and then Vodafone's internet business in Egypt, then Vodafone's internet business in all emerging markets, and then came out to India in about 7 years ago, 2011, I think.
Wow. Just as the internet was showing up on our phones.
Just as the internet, yeah. So in fact, to help the internet show up on our phones. So that was around about the time everyone was launching 3G.
Right.
Did that for a few years. Then I got bored because I'd done enough Vodafone by then, much as it's a nice place to work. At that time, I'd met loads of startups and new tech businesses. Ended up kind of deciding to do my own thing. I built a business called Bilba Chow. Bilba Chow was essentially a mobile app that monitored your usage, your calls, and everything else, but it also monitored your signal strength and data speed. Okay, and it basically crowdsourced that. That had about 1 million downloads or so, and in the end, it was picked up by a large new telecoms entrant in about 2 years ago now. Okay, so I sold that business. Then I took some time off because I made a bit of money and kind of always wanted to do something in the fintech space.
Right.
Not necessarily because it was a hypey sort of space.
Right.
Although it
is right
turns
now.
out it is, or maybe it was, I think.
We're 1 year past demonetization.
Every
now.
hype has a reaction, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, I guess right now we might be in the reactionary cycle. But still.
I think we're in the reality cycle.
Okay.
Like most startups. So, along the way, I also do a little bit of advisory work. I sit on the advisory board of a company called Abra, which is a Bitcoin-based peer-to-peer money transfer service. I sit on the advisory board of Reverie, which is a language tech business for Indic languages. Also work with the Digital Empowerment Foundation, which is a very cool organization if you haven't come across it, but it ultimately tries to create, or alleviate poverty through the provision of technology or using technology.
Wow, very interesting.
That's really cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah. They do all sorts of really cool stuff. So things like, cutting out the middleman, direct relationships between, for example, basket weavers and end buyers, and have huge impact, actually.
Right.
But ultimately, my day job at the moment is running CreditMate. So CreditMate is 18 months old, just about, a business that we founded along with my co-founders, a guy called Ashish Doshi, a guy called Aditya Singh. Founded that really with no idea about lending, but we wanted to try and address lending in what I call mass middle India segment. So there are lots, in fact, the hype cycle was largely fueled by lots of people building kind of weighted questionnaires, but with a bit of Facebook login, but mainly designed for the top 1 or 2% of the country. And so what we were really focused on was really saying, how can we lend to mass middle India? So we spent a bit of time understanding, what mass middle India wants.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so we discovered the sort of primary asset. The first material purchase most people have is a motorbike.
Right.
Okay. Because there's 200 million on India's roads.
And
India,
we are the largest country?
We are, yeah. It's the largest motorcycle market in the world for new and used bikes now.
Yeah.
And clearly, whilst there are public transport initiatives, of varying degrees of success or completion, at the moment, if you're in India, it's the default mode of transport for most people.
Right.
Means there's also a productivity asset. Okay, so if you're a self-employed plumber
You need to be able to get around.
you need to be able to get around.
Right.
So we like that asset. We like the fact it was an asset, and also it's a secured asset that you can lend against. So again, in contrast to the sort of EMI on checkout for your new mobile phone, we believe that the bike was probably a more valued first purchase. So we started out in Bombay around July last year. Started issuing loans, really very basically with a spreadsheet and a sort of prayer. Then understood kind of what we needed to build from a technology perspective. Built a whole bunch of technology that allows used bike dealers to be able to assess a customer from a credit worthiness perspective and also an affordability perspective, and then match them with a loan.
Wow, wonderful! So while it's a specific sector, fintech, and even specific sector lending product, and all of this is out of the research and understanding of the market you have from
Yeah.
your experiences so far, right? And
Correct.
obviously your co-founders.
And I think, no, none of us have any experience in lending, actually, or even in bikes. But I can't even ride one, I'll be honest
Wow.
with you. But we like that sector because, A, there was nobody in it. So it's kind of like a sandbox.
Right.
Obviously, a lot of new bikes are sold with finance, but nobody was doing used bike finance. We liked it because it's a productivity asset, as I've said. And we also liked it because there's a degree of social impact, which is if you can get access to a bike at a reasonable price, then you can probably get a better job, or at least you can achieve more.
So this might be secret sauce, or if it is, then please don't. But how do you gauge creditworthiness?
So that it's secret sauce. It's very, very complicated.
Okay.
So I'll be honest with you because I'm an honest person. The reality, as I said, is that most people are using what I would call a weighted questionnaire.
Okay.
Yeah, which is, are you married? Are you not married?
Right.
Do you have kids? Yeah, social network login, arguably interesting. In practical terms, completely irrelevant in India. The reason for that is that probably you've all got Facebook accounts. I'm guessing that your auntie, your uncle, your mother,
Your
your
neighbor.
brother and your neighbor on it, right? So your behavior on your Facebook account is in no way a reflection of
who you
are as
actually
an
are, yeah.
individual. Possibly your Snapchat or something like that, if you were so inclined.
Okay.
So what we really do is we say, look, is there a match between this particular demographic, this particular bike? So obviously, because we're also assessing the asset in our case.
Right.
So there's the individual and then there's the bike itself.
Right.
So what is this bike going to be worth in 3 years' time after the end of the loan? Yeah. If we have to go and recover the bike, have we got margin left in the bike?
Right.
In terms of credit assessing customers, you're looking at stuff like demographics, age, gender, location, geography, occupation. So to give you a sense, we are lending 60% of our customers have no credit history.
That's what I would. That's why I'm kind of asking, because if you're working in the used bike segment, then at that point it would be unlikely that you'd get Crystal's not going to help you.
Yeah, no, exactly. So in fact, we use Sybil.
Sybil,
only Sybil because you really just use that to weed out the really dodgy people.
Right.
Okay, but most people return back what's called a Sybil -1 score, which is a negative, means no history.
Okay.
No history, yeah. Sybil is actually more useful for bad history, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have
that's what we use it
known
for.
bad history, that's worse than no history.
Right.
Although ironically, again, one of the funky insights is that people with a really bad credit history actually pay quite well. And the reason for that is that they know they've got a bad credit history.
They want to fix it.
And they want to fix that. Yeah. Okay. But most people are new to credit. Most people are self-employed. So they will be anything from a panwala to a carpenter to a small shop owner. Average salary is about 22,000 rupees. Mostly living in a household which has 4 to 8 adults in it. So joint families. And pretty much, mass market India, I would say, is our target audience. Operating now in Bombay, in Pune, in Nagpur, Nasik, Gujarat, some parts of rural Gujarat as well. So we've got a mix of kind of tier 1 metro cities, as well as really rural markets.
Another question popping into my head, and again, it might be to this, but you're in used bikes, but you're building a customer list of people who you can depend on. So are you looking at moving into other areas or other asset classes?
We are, and we might, but I'm a sort of subscriber to the Peter Thiel theory that kind of vaguely says to focus on a particular vertical and get good at that.
Right.
Yeah.
If anything, we might expand our activity inside that vertical beyond just finance.
Okay.
As opposed to necessarily adding new categories. The other thing that you have to kind of play around with when you're lending is your raw material is capital. Okay, so unlike a product company or a social network, for example, raw material is people.
Right.
In our case, it's raw material is capital. So you're sort of constantly looking for a relationship with other lenders that have large balance sheets that can lend in the asset that you're in. never say never. Used vehicles is definitely interesting. We like secured lending. That works for us.
Right.
So anything that you can secure. So in our case, that would mean cars, bikes, possibly tractors and three-wheelers.
Right. Oh, makes sense.
And obviously vehicles, because they are utility and productivity products, like you said.
Exactly.
And that differentiates them from, I don't know, homes and loans and mobile phones.
White goods. I mean, like your refrigerators.
on
and
both sides.
So the tragedy of most fintechs, I think, has been that, let's say we just talked about you bought a new phone, right? And let's say I bought that on EMIs, and the next day you drop your phone and smash the screen, right? Your propensity to repay that EMI is going to be much less.
Correct.
Or the holiday to goer that you've only got a hangover for, there's no utility forward in that, right? So your ability to, or your kind of priority list of repayments
that goes
is
lower
probably
down.
home, bike or vehicle, and then the rest is subsequent.
Interesting. So it's actually more psychological about what you really feel
What you
like
need.
paying
And
for.
what you need,
Yeah,
absolutely.
what you
And I mean, the other, I have this, honestly, I think in most lending situations, there's a huge amount of effort going into how do you assess a customer going into the system. It's my view that you can do all that and you can do as good a job as you can at that, but your ability to collect is the most fundamental piece of lending.
Right.
Okay. And actually, most of our investment is in lending tech, so meaning collection technology. Further, India is a market that has no really, I don't think any repeat purchase or subscription-based business models.
No, that's not there.
It's just not that, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's on prepaid mobile phone.
Yeah.
Everybody gets prepaid Tata Sky.
Yeah.
Everybody is, is pay as you go, basically. So the behavior of regular repayments for finance is something you have to build with your customers, especially if you're a first-time lender.
Again, for a market like yours, which is, like you said, where you have data, you have data on how you want to roll out into the market, and you are doing that, expanding into various tier 2 cities. But your customer data is actually like everyone's showing up with nothing.
Correct.
More or less.
Yeah.
And so I think, and I know we've discussed this briefly, that the vendors in your network or the middlemen who you work with are actually a sort of a nerve center for assessing
Correct.
whether or not an inbound customer is worthy.
Another reason that we like physical assets like bikes is that ultimately it requires a face-to-face transaction. Yeah, so if I want to buy a Xiaomi, I can buy it on Amazon, and I know it's going to be a Xiaomi, and I don't have to worry about that. In the case of a used vehicle, there's a degree of trust that you have to have, and it's a physical transaction. And our dealers are often, especially in markets like Bombay, although it's a massive metro, they're often regionalized, serving a small catchment area. And in this particular segment of society, most people kind of know of each other. Okay, so the dealers will provide a kind of first filter, just gut feel on this guy's a good guy, I'm not sure about this person. And actually one thing that we want to do, which we have not yet done, is to make the dealers participate a little bit more formally in that credit assessment and possibly also the risk. Actually, it's quite interesting what happens to a dealer who takes credit because finance has not been available. So what's typically happening in the market historically is that people would save up 20, 30,000 rupees, they'd go to the dealer and say, I want to buy a bike.
Right.
And then the dealer would point to a sort of 8-year-old Bajaj Pulsar that's a bit dusty and say that's what you get for 25,000, right? But what happens now with finance is that they're able to say, well, how much is that nearly new Honda Activa?
Right.
And that's 50,000, but you can bridge the gap with a loan. So the customer is happier because he's getting a better bike. The dealer's happy because he's selling a bike that isn't going to cause trouble and kind of keep coming back to the shop.
Right.
And secondly, the dealer makes more money. Right, so these guys are turnover for a dealer that works with us probably increases 30 to 40% within about 2 or 3 months. Because the ticket price is higher, and also because he's got more volume,
more, and hence more inventory going out. So,
exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're actually that's the incentive for a dealer network to obviously
and
work with.
We don't really incentivize the dealers in any other way. So, typical channel business like ours.
Generally, there's a cut, right?
You would normally give a cut. We do give a small cut as a token, but it's less than 1%. So the main
Okay.
motivation is
about
actually
increasing turnover, which is
increasing
good
turnover.
as that's the virtuous cycle for you as well. The more
Exactly.
they sell, the more
precisely
you work.
Yeah, and we also have just introduced dealer finance
Okay.
for the same reason, because actually we sort of create a problem.
Huh.
Their cash flow is not sufficient. They won't qualify for any kind of formal SME lending because they're quite small enterprises. So we give them finance to be able to buy stock.
Wow.
And then we offset that finance with loans that they provide on to the end customer.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So that's where all your fintech actually comes
That's
in.
right. So if you go to our website, you won't see much tech because ultimately our website is a lag.
Right.
Yeah, it's a consumer-facing website. We're just tweaking it right now, but all of our investment has been in back-end platform and front-end for the dealer network.
Very interesting. And how exactly? So obviously you and I'm gonna probably come back and talk about the mass middle India effect and how different people see it. We'll talk about that a little later. But specific to again this space, traditional lenders have been around.
Yeah.
They've been giving loans per se to new bikes, like you said, not so much to used. And those traditional lenders have had some sort of engagement with these dealers as well.
Yeah.
So how are you breaking that bond which they have, or how are they trusting you more?
Yeah. So, dealers like speed. Okay, so actually this is where fintech theoretically should play a role.
Right.
So what they want to know is with a degree of certainty that this loan is going to happen, which means I can reserve this bike while the customer goes and gets his KYC and whatever else. Okay, so speed is really important.
Right.
And actually this app that we've built gives them that sort of, almost instant in-principle approval. And then it gives them a tracking process to see how that loan is progressing. So that's one way that we do that. We cannot compete in new bikes. I certainly don't have the scale to be able to compete with, for example, HDFC, who offer very low lending. Often also in new bikes, the OEMs are related.
Right.
So the OEMs will have a finance company and their business model is a sort of hybrid between sales and finance and insurance.
Right.
Most of our guys do not sell new bikes, so most of them are purely used bikes only, so they are underserved. The only people that have been in that market historically are money lenders.
Pure play money lenders.
Pure play, 2.5% a month, flat interest rate.
The old school Indian lender.
Exactly.
Wow. Who have the most efficient collection system.
And who collect, exactly. Collecting with menace. So, the dealers like it. And I draw a parallel to the used car market in India. So if you, for example, I'm married to an Indian person before I came to India. But, her parents, for example, would say, never buy a used car, right? It's just not in the psyche to buy a used vehicle, right? But in the last maybe 10 years in India, the used car market has grown to be larger than the new car market. And, what is the driver for that? The driver for that is two things. One is that I can either buy a Maruti Suzuki Swift Desire and appear to be an Ola driver, or I can buy a 3-year-old Volkswagen Polo.
Right.
Yeah, and that makes me feel better about life.
Yeah.
And the added advantage in India is nobody can tell how old the car is because it doesn't say on the number plate.
Yes.
So sort of upgrading from base model to slightly more luxury is what drove that market. And the second thing is that finance was available on relatively comparable terms to new.
Yeah.
Also better quality cars, right? Because I wouldn't buy, 15 years ago when your options were Fiat and Maruti and stuff like that, I would never buy a used one of those.
I agree. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Today now, if you're looking at a Honda or something like that, it's not that out of the realm to buy a used Honda.
Totally
it makes
agree.
sense.
Totally agree. And things hold their value a little bit longer in India. So unlike in the West, probably where the minute you drive the car off the forecourt, it's 30% depreciated.
Right.
It's more like 20% in India, but that's still a material hit. So buyers are becoming a little bit more savvy. Trust is starting to emerge in that segment.
Right.
And vehicles themselves, as you rightly say, are long-term vehicles now.
Right. Yeah.
Especially the
I've seen
scooters.
this in my family. It used to be, we had the same attitude. Nobody would ever touch a used car. But now, off late, it is like, I want to get a Skoda Superb. I should get that used. Why should I get that new? You know what I mean? I want to get a Honda City. Why should I get that old? I get a 2-year-old.
The awareness of a vehicle, and especially a four-wheeler in this case, as a depreciating asset is also something which people are now sort of aware of. I mean, unless you're very much at the top of the pyramid, you understand that this is only going to sink me more money. Yeah. So it makes sense to take that 20%, 30% cut by buying used.
So that's what, that is what we hope and are starting to see happening in bikes. And that's no surprise because India sells 20 million new bikes every year. Right. And that stock has to go somewhere. And plus you have quite a sort of virtuous upgrade cycle. So people that buy new vehicles will renew every 2 years. They'll use that older bike as a trade-in, and that then flows into the system as a used bike. Wow. So that's kind of how our market works.
And I mean, the absolute value of the bikes or bikes in this range are also something which helps it to be a easy first purchase, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, our average loan size is about 42,000 rupees, so it's slightly higher than you might expect.
Right. That actually is higher than I would expect.
But that's for the full bike.
Yeah, but still, 42,000 is the loan cost, right? So I mean, there'll be a down payment on top of that. So I'm guessing ticket size 60, 65,000.
50, 55 on average. Right. We take depends on the quality of the customer. So again, one of our assessments is, we take a larger down payment if we're a bit nervous about the customer. Right. But ultimately, these bikes hold their value quite well. They're actually, so you're not buying the base model, right? So the headline on the road price, advertised price for the base model Honda Activa is maybe 55,000 rupees, but the one you want to buy is more like 75.
Right.
Nice. Great. So I think we could keep going on into a lot of lending parameters, and which I want to do. So I think we're going to take a quick break and come back.
Hi, I'm Amit Verma, the host of the weekly podcast, The Seen and the Unseen. In my show, I examine the seen effects and the unintended consequences of public policy and private action. I show how policies meant to help the poor often end up hurting the poor. I've done episodes so far on demonetization, GST, surgical strikes, immigration and MRP. And I will continue my forensic assault on the truth in the weeks to come.
Catch the show every Monday on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you prefer. Or visit seenunseen.in for all the latest updates.
Hey, welcome back, guys. I think we have been having quite an engaging lending discussion. I really didn't know that you could really go so deep in just used bikes, and obviously that brings me to my next point about insight insight into India, which you as an immigrant here have versus the rest of us homegrown buddies who are building apps and building products and building technology for the rest of India. That probably how big is the dichotomy between these two audiences?
So this is a favorite subject of mine, but and I'm really glad you used the term immigrant, because I hate the word expat. Not least because I used to be one, and now I have nothing like the buying
I actually
power.
don't know what's the definition-wise difference.
There's no. It's just white people trying to feel better about life.
I heard expat is somebody who's here temporarily. Immigrant is somebody who's moved.
That's probably fair.
Yeah, I mean, like that. That's kind of what I've heard as the.
Yeah, but anyway. So my general view on immigrants anywhere is that they come unpreconditioned. And my general view on India, having lived in it and been married to it for quite a long time, is that there's a lot of preconditioning that happens in India. And most of it is subconscious, which is that we tend to be a very strata-based society. And people are kind of compartmentalized by surname or by look or by accent or by clothes.
By where they live in Bombay.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Very subconsciously. And, we just do that.
No, you're pointing at me, but dude, you live in Bandra. So, I mean, like, Bandra is just as much of a enclave as anywhere else.
We're all stratas.
Yeah. So I like the fact that I come without those preconceptions. And I think that has advantages. There's massive disadvantages because I make terrible social errors, but I basically don't see people in a sort of compartmentalized way. In the way that, for example, I mentioned before some other technology businesses, they tend to be built by certain category of people, funded often by the same category of people, and designed for the same category of people, right? So the crossover into other other social segments is a little tougher for those guys, in my opinion. In fact, you sort of see that playing out, right?
Yeah.
So, why is Paytm, for example, winning well in India is because Vijay is not a, IIT elite type of guy, right? He's a straight up. He's been selling stuff to mass market India for years.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of basic understanding is important. I also think that it's very amusing sometimes being, looking at India from the sort of the outside in. Yeah, India is a fiercely proud place. Yeah, I mean, I think I can't remember. I think it was the founder of Infosys who said that India has the largest quotient of ego per unit of achievement in the world. Yeah. But very proud place. So you have to play around with that a little bit. Clearly, there are quite strong cultural differentiation between different sectors of society. So I think it's fun being an immigrant here. It's a crazy place. Yeah, you never stop learning. It is difficult sometimes to get your head around some of the drivers. Just to briefly touch, for example, back on the credit piece, as an example. One of the things that we notice is that most people are deeply afraid of loss of social status. Okay, so in particular, if you're a guy earning 20,000 rupees and you've lived in the society that you live in for the last 50 years with your family, then you really, really will do anything to avoid having a guy knocking on your door saying, "Pay me." Okay, so actually you can also use those social pieces to your advantage. And the second thing actually is that, I have this discussion all the time, especially with the sort of VC community, but, the basic assumption is nobody trusts the other people.
Yeah,
right?
I think we go out the door with zero trust.
Yeah, absolutely. So trust is funny, and an actual overt mistrust.
Yeah.
So VCs will say, "How the hell can you lend to somebody who only earns 20,000 rupee with no credit history?"
Right.
But then on the other hand, they fully understand why Vijay Mallya has a large
The biggest default.
down payment. So these preconceptions are everywhere, I think, in India, and it's quite fun to be from the outside looking in. That's
And relying solely on real data.
solely on real data. In fact, again, when we first started out, we were doing traditional lending, if you like, which is a loan application form, a photo, a physical verification, all the same stuff that most lenders do. And when we stopped doing that and moved to a machine, actually the number of people we were approving, from certain backgrounds or certain places or certain, looking people, balanced out, right? So that human sort of bias, if you like, is removed by machines, which is quite a fun thing to also observe.
Right. And so again, all of this is again something, see, the machines should work the same for whether it's you building it or whether it's an Indian homegrown guy building it. But what I tend to see is, like you mentioned earlier, we build the biases into our product. Whether it's from I remember before when the first app started out, probably 2011, early internet days or mobile internet days, everyone was focused on building better UI. And it was always like, our app has to look the glossiest if we want to cut it. That was a much bigger differentiator than even what domain you were going into.
Absolutely.
So these are, I had the same preconceived notions. I mean, because I was building for showing this app to people who were like me and who understood, who were always drawn to the American version of it's got a similar app.
I agree.
So in all these years, while you've been here, you've observed all these folks around you. You've lived in Goregaon, which I know is alien territory to Amit here.
I've been there, man. I used to go there all the time. Like, seriously, all the time.
RA Milk Colony.
No, I used to. So I was an assistant director on movies back in the early 90s. So there used to be a Filmistan studio. There used to be a Filmalaya studio. There used to be Film City. So I used to go there all the time.
Film City's still there, man.
Film City's still there. Film City's still there.
So you cut across all these preconceived notions. While I'm sure even today, the crop which is coming out, new entrepreneurs today, right? People, even the kind of audience we talk to here. Do you see that changing?
So I totally agree with you that the trend towards Americanized, minimalized UI, is a bit of a mistake, in my opinion, in India, right? I mean, India is just not minimalized or, toned down, right, at a mass level. Yeah, you walk down on the street, it's full of color and noise and, chaos. Yeah. Most of those designs, I think, are over-engineered and, in fact, off-putting, intimidating, potentially, to users. There's another parallel, I think, with China. If you look at Chinese apps...
it's like they're all, like, they're really
full
loud.
of stuff.
They're jangly, right? Yeah. And they're kind of red, and they're they're Chinese, and they're unabashedly Chinese. Right. To us, they may look a bit cluttered, but it's right for China. It's right for mass market. And there's a good story that I enjoy, which is a true story, which is about a panwala. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell it very quickly. But a panwala who had a thriving stall, actually in Car, I think. And, lots of customers, and he had this for years, and they'd all come and buy pan from him and sit around and have a bit of a gossip. And he came into some money, not enough money to retire, but he came into enough money to upgrade his shop. So he upgraded his shop, he made it nice looking, he put a glass door on it and put AC in it. And none of his customers came in anymore, because basically they assumed that this was not for them anymore. Yeah. So I think you have to be careful with UI. You can be... intimidating, it can be off-putting, it can sort of reek of richness and elitism when that isn't the reality of your customer base.
Right. Nor the aspiration. I mean, we always think that people would aspire to use an app like this, but even that's not
agree.
That's not
Take
what
a look in VJ sales at Indian stereos or hi-fi, right? It to my mind it looks like the 80s in England, right, where you had lots of flashing lights and
full of buttons
and
everywhere,
chrome and button and everything else. But that's what that's what appeals. That's what India wants. It doesn't want sleek minimalist necessarily. So that doesn't mean to say that you have to. This is not dumbing it down. This is making it appropriate and appealing to your target audience, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's something that is definitely part of, like Clear Trip versus Make My Trip, right? Yeah. And I feel like that is part of the thing, right? I mean, like, why is Make My Trip so much bigger than Clear Trip is? I use Clear Trip for every ticket I ever book, because for me it makes sense. But Make My Trip is just, it's a more, it's
adding
more
the bells and whistles.
Yeah, and I think that's what most people want.
It's like Bollywood versus art house cinema. Bollywood seems to do better, and it is a little bit. It's bright, it's vibrant, it's noisy, it's somewhat formulaic, arguably, but it's what India wants. It does not want, black and white, sort of dark, confusing movies.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, incident from today, I took an Ola, and it was actually a black and white cab, by the way, but running on proper Ola, I think micro, because now they allow cabs.
But I thought cabs aren't allowed to turn their ACs on.
No, now they are.
Okay.
So in my conversation with him, it was like, hey, so it's great. So how are you liking it? How do you enjoy coming on board Ola, and is it better? So he's like, hey, I do, because I know how to use my phone. But every day I try to talk to the other taxi guys in the stand where we usually sit, and they're all onboarded, but they just can't get around the app. I'm like, I try to train them every day that, you have to say accept, and you have to think of the dot on the map and follow. It's like they're just refusing. So half the guys are quitting, saying, no, this is just too busy. This is not for me. I'd rather just sit in the sun, wait for someone to walk to my door and say, I want to go here.
Do you know what? I really like this analogy, because if it's easy to say in India everything's a problem and somebody needs to suddenly learn how to use something. And it's true to an extent. But if you think about the evolution that most of us have been through in our sector of society, we started out with a basic phone. Where you did texting, and then you had a slightly better phone where you did email, and then you did a slightly better phone where you could do more stuff.
Pictures,
You didn't suddenly go from zero to a smartphone with a touch screen, right? So you have to kind of forgive that change. And I think the other thing is that India doesn't have maps, man.
Yeah.
It doesn't have maps. It's never had maps.
Yeah,
right?
no,
So you can't suddenly expect a guy who's
Yeah,
never
not
had
even
a map.
paper maps.
There's no
Yeah.
paper maps,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I have all sorts of problems because my Hindi is absolutely atrocious.
Your
So
taxi Hindi?
my taxi Hindi is even worse. So, you know, I just end up sort of saying, please come to the blue dot, right? And it just doesn't happen. Whereas if you go to Singapore
Right.
or any other market with Uber, you know, the car sort of magically turns up without, you know, any sort of human intervention.
Yeah.
India requires 3 or 4 phone calls.
Yes, it does.
And it requires, you know, I'm not coming to the blue dot. You know, I'm here, you're there. You know, it's just massively confusing. But in fairness, that's because I think there hasn't been this.
No, you're right.
learning.
Maps are just simply not part of people. People
Yeah.
don't navigate by map. I mean,
No.
like that just is not something that ever happened over here. So, yeah, it is confusing to even like, you know, not to, well, I am being elitist, I guess. I mean, like, but you know, even to highly educated people of a certain age,
Yeah.
they can't hack maps.
No,
they just
they
can't
can't.
do it. I mean, like, you know, so if your educational levels are lower, then it's going to be even,
Yeah.
I think, a little tougher, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, like that,
No, I agree.
yeah, it's a toughness.
Yeah.
I think, you know, and we see this a lot, you know, utility is what drives usage.
Yeah.
I actually think, you know, and there's all these tired cliches like 3-year-olds being able to use a touchscreen in, you know, 2 seconds. So I personally don't think it's inability to use. I think that the benefits of using
Need
some
to outweigh.
services need to
Yeah.
be significant. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, you're right. Everybody learns how to use Amazon really fast.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
because it's just the price is there, right? So I mean, like, there's a money kind of incentive for that. So
Totally.
they just learn how to use that really fast.
I mean, and if you know, in America, there's an app for that.
Yeah.
In India, there's a man for that. Right? So it's actually cheaper and easier to have a man
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, we used to have, obviously at Voda, we used to do recharge. Right? And most people hand the phone over to the guy.
Right.
Even though it's a completely self-serve process. They say, please, can you recharge? Just
Yep.
recharge my
Yep.
phone.
Yep.
So, you know, don't discount the sort of ingrained requirement to A, ask someone to do something for you, and B, also, I kind of also think everyone likes to have a minion in India. That's you kind of, you know, everybody wants a minion,
Yeah.
right? So if you're a certain level of employee at a company, then you like to be able to lord it over the office boy, and the office boy on his way home likes to lord it over the rickshaw driver, and so it goes on. So self-serve, I think, actually is not a concept that India is very
we're not do it
comfortable
yourself
with.
at all.
Yeah.
I think again that's the top of the strata which
Yeah.
tries to be do it yourself, and there are
Not
products which
really, right? I mean, like, it's very surface do-it-yourself stuff, right? You're not, I mean, like, no matter what, if you're looking at, like, you know, the top strata economically, right? I mean, they might say do it yourself. They might be like, yeah, okay, I want to do it. But no, at the end of it, somebody is cooking their food. Somebody is washing their clothes. Somebody is
Yeah.
doing all that. So it's
Yeah.
not do it yourself, do it
I
yourself.
think the IKEA is just starting out. I wonder what will happen to that.
I-
Furniture will arrive.
Well, no, so IKEA actually, they're contracting with people to kind of
Assemble.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's like delivery with assembly guy, and it'll all happen like that. And I mean, that's what Urban Clap and Pepper Fry do too, right?
Exactly.
You order something from there, and like the carpenter calls you, and like, your thing is coming right now, and I'll come like 3 hours later to assemble it.
There's a fun. I mean, as a white guy as well in India, you know, people get completely freaked out if I try and do stuff sometimes. So, for example,
Can I tell you, it's not white guy, it's guy.
yeah, okay, guy. Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, like, I know that at my house. So when I first came back from the U.S.,
Yeah.
if I would go into the kitchen to get a glass of water, everybody would freak out. I no, seriously, they would just like, go, we'll get it. You go and sit, and you just sit. It was like just not understood that this is something
Yeah.
that I like. I'll ask you for water. It'll take you 3 minutes to get it. I'll just pour a glass and take it. Why would I wait for you? But that is not this. Sorry,
No.
interrupted you.
No, it's good. I was going to say there's another example. I walk the kids to school every morning in the gown, and there was some roadworks going on. As always in India, when there's roadworks going on, it's the pavement that suffers, not the road, right? So there's a big pile of bricks in the middle of the pavement, which means the kids have to all walk into the road. So I got fed up, and on the way back, I started moving the bricks. And suddenly, this sort of crowd, developed. Nobody obviously helped, but they called the security guys to come and do it. So, you know, people get totally freaked out if you do stuff like that. And but that's again this sort of strata-based thing.
Yeah.
So it's just, it doesn't occur to me that, you know, I should not do this.
No.
It's like, you know, the guys that have their driver carry their bag into the office.
Oh, man.
yeah.
You know, it's just random. You know,
Yes.
I don't get it. The
Yeah,
lift man.
Yeah.
You know, why do we need a lift man?
Well, that is a question for the ages, right? I mean, I really don't understand why are we taking
So that
one
he has
spot
a
out
job.
of...
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So
it's,
that he
it's a
has a
small elevator, man. It's, you know, these elevators are packed, especially like...
Yeah.
So this was, it used to be my... at the Nariman Point building where I used to work. These are not huge elevators.
No.
They're elevators big enough for maybe 10 people.
Yeah.
There is always a line of 20 people waiting to get into the elevator. Why are we using one spot for the lift man?
Not only the lift man, but also his chair.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah, both things. Why are we wasting space when there's always a line to get in the elevator?
Because we don't want to push the buttons.
Yeah, too tough.
Which kind of comes back to your Ola use case. You know, and I do think that we are, you know, and we're sort of seeing that, right? You know, how is Flipkart planning to grow shops? You know, how is Urban Ladder planning to grow shops? You know, so the sort of concept.
Lenskart, same thing. Lenskart, I mean, like, people go into there all the time, man.
Yeah.
Because they got great deals, but nobody wants to order these classes online.
And they want to be served.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Somehow,
You know,
they
that's
want a
part
human.
of the transaction. You know, you sort of want some service, I think. You know, the joy of, you can't shout at an app as well. You know, that's the other thing. You know, it's like, where's my McDonald's, right? If I ordered it by phoning up, then I can phone up and shout at people, but you can't shout at Swiggy.
Yeah.
So it causes enormous frustration.
Well-
and it's also, you probably can.
Well, yeah, you know, so I was out with friends I was at somebody's house last night, and we ordered food. And the delivery was late. And like, once the food was like 10 minutes late, everybody's like, call them, let's shout at them, call them, let's shout. I'm like, call them, we got to shout at them, call them, we got to shout at them.
It's definitely the case. People like shouting at
Yeah.
people. And, you know,
Everywhere.
it's
People
also
in the
massively,
country.
you know, it's kind of more efficient sometimes. I mean, people forget that the phone also makes calls. You know, I mean,
Of course.
you know, if I want to call the local Kirana store to get some, you know, half a kilogram of rice, right? You know, going into the app, opening the app, searching through, finding rice, selecting buy, going to the checkout, I might as well just phone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are some use cases where, you know, and India is a delivery. It's crazy what you get delivered here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, people will deliver in 3 minutes pretty much whatever you want.
Yeah. And they've been doing this for ages.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think there are some use cases that are a little forced. I'm not, you know, maybe I'm too old, but, you know, there are some services I think that will fly. I think people will get used to this stuff. But I do think that cultural sort of need to be served, that concept of there's a man for that, you know, is quite important.
Right.
And there's always going to be enough men for something or the other.
Yeah.
So future tech entrepreneurs definitely have to build around that.
I agree.
And figure that out. But the other side of India, which also I guess you're privy to, is how Indians abroad are more Indian than the ones we see here.
Yeah.
And what's the impact of that?
On a personal level,
Obviously, you've seen stuff like
I suspect my in-laws will never ever listen to this podcast. So the impact of that is there are two things that happen to me when I go and visit my in-laws in Nano, Gujarat in the UK. One is that my wife, who is a fairly feisty, independent woman, suddenly turns into a sort of servant to me. So she, you know, my food is brought out first, and you know the ladies are in the kitchen and all this kind of stuff. So that's completely peculiar to me, and obviously to her as well.
Yeah.
And they live in India in essence. You know, I mean they kind of left in the 60s in their case, and they've never sort of stopped. They've never evolved from that point. So their kind of evolution has stayed the same.
I see the same thing in my family.
Yeah.
People who live over there, they basically hardened their lives to what India was in the 60s, and they kind of expect their children to live in the same kinds of ways, and then they don't, and so then there's a lot of conflict around that.
My father-in-law comes to India relatively frequently, and he still, sews some money into his into his trousers.
What?
Seriously. And then when we get you get a rickshaw, you want to give a tip to somebody,
right.
He'll get his shiny 1 rupee coin out.
Oh.
Because in his mind that's a large tip, and that's how it should be.
Yeah.
But it's just India is moving on very much faster than those guys, and I think that does create some conflict as well.
Yeah.
I think, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I see that I see that in my just extended family all the time, right? Where parents expect children. Again, we're good. I'm also Gujarati, and like we're Jain, so not just Gujarati,
Okay.
right? But they expect that the kids will not drink, that kids will not eat meat, that they will come home at certain times, and nobody does anything of this nature. So what winds up happening is that everything is done behind backs.
Always, yeah.
And so that's just not good, because then at some point things are going to come out, and then everybody's unhappy.
No, I agree with you. I think that sort of pent up, frustration is an interesting dynamic.
At the same time, though, what I was trying to get at was these folks who are living abroad as Indians have experienced what these various countries have given them, right? So they've experienced America or UK or any other country abroad grow technologically in a more superior way. So hence, they've absorbed that culture also.
Not as much as you'd think. I would suggest that,
as he mentioned earlier, right? There's this pride thing. And so I think that people who have moved abroad still feel like tremendous kind of attachment and pride about India.
Yeah,
We're
culturally.
Indian.
But
no, and then
in everyday life, they still have to adapt to what the systems which are in place over there.
But I think what ends up, it's like I was saying earlier. Imagine if, all the British people that ever came to India, notwithstanding the last 100 years, but if I hung out with only other British people in a special British area, and just ate fish and chips and carried around a rolled up umbrella and read the Times newspaper, that would be considered a bit weird, right?
Yeah.
But actually, that's how
Indian
Leicester
society is
in the UK. It's the whole area is Gujarati. And so everybody eats Gujarati food. The shops are Gujarati. Everybody's walking around. So obviously there are exceptions to that, and especially the second and third generation kids are much more integrated. But those parents are very staunch in their views.
extremely conservative. I mean, like much more so than. I mean, like my uncles over here are much more open to stuff than my uncles over there are. And it's kind of it's really sometimes you're just like, how is this possible? Because the uncles over here are older too. It's not the uncles over there are not as old, so it's still over here they're just open to a lot more stuff than they are over there.
I think it's the thing I admire about India actually is the family bond. I mean this is completely alien to us Brits. Where you basically leave home at 18 and
you're on your
try
own.
and avoid your parents for the rest of your life. Whereas, that sort of closeness and that the extended family and everything else, I think it's quite admirable, actually.
Yeah.
So there are, whilst we're sort of slightly joking about some aspects of that, I think there are also some very strong.
There are
points
strong
as well.
community aspects and stuff like that. I mean, the Indian community generally is pretty close-knit in that sense. They're able to do certain cultural things. But, I mean, like, it's... I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not the biggest... I've had not such pleasant experiences with those.
No,
Yeah,
so
no,
that's
I
again,
agree.
right? So probably what we're seeing is us as urban citizens are not losing this cultural bond, but we're also we're not experiencing what mass middle is, right? Mass middle still has these bonds integrated,
absolutely.
and that forms the basis of their outlook on all the new tech and all the new products and all the new stuff happening in the country.
Absolutely.
So-
And, how do you decide to buy something in India, right? I mean, most people, they will do some research. Sorry, not most people. We will do research online.
Yeah.
And we'll read some reviews.
Right.
For
We trust
95%,
absolutely alien
it's,
people.
it's basically, what Kaka says.
Yeah.
If I want to buy a phone, Kaka understands phones. Or, Auntie understands which pots and pans to buy. And that's my influence. And so... And decisions are made on a joint basis in these families. They're not, you don't independently go and do something.
Yeah.
You will, let's say you want to get a bike, right? Then you will go back. There'll be a large discussion about it.
Yeah.
Everybody will have a point of view. Somebody else will be brought into the discussion, and then a decision is made. Yeah. So, that's also an interesting dynamic because it's a bit like you have this concept of pester power in marketing, where kids make. Parents buy things, right?
Yes,
but in India, you actually have to influence the totality of that family unit for large purchases.
I had a really interesting conversation with somebody a couple of days ago about how Indian families are like corporates with boards of directors, outside directors. You have different stakeholders. You have a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas families in the Western are more like kind of individual units, like partnership firms.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was in context of a marriage kind of thing, but I mean, like, I think it just kind of holds nonetheless.
It's definitely true, and they also, that's why I'm a marketeer at heart, and I quite enjoy these. Why does that happen?
Mm-hmm.
This whole sort of trust thing, I think, is really interesting. If you look at brands, for example, in India, I mean, it's very rare anywhere else in the world for large monolithic brands to be able to expand into other categories like they do in India, because trust deficit probably, and people are very savvy in mass market India. They don't. Headline price does not always influence them. But total cost of ownership is what influences most people.
Yeah.
We probably less so. But why does Nokia still have some market share in India, and why did it have it for years? Because there's a service center down the road. Why do people buy Maruti? Because there's a service center down the road, and I can take it back.
Yeah.
So the decision making is much more nuanced actually than most of our decision making, and for the reasons that we've discussed.
Yeah. Makes sense. I bet that.
Great. I mean, I think we have a lot to learn from our own observations, which like even today, if you step out, like you said, on the road, there are colors and noises and sounds all over, but we choose to ignore them and we jump into a cab.
Yeah.
So I don't know how this education or this further opening of our eyes will happen, but I'm hoping whoever's building for mass middle next figures this out, and we have a lot more interesting stuff coming in.
Good.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Jonathan.
Pleasure.
This was a great show. I think we got some really interesting conversations in.
Yeah, this was great.
And we'd love to have our listeners give in some feedback on the show and what else. And obviously you can reach Jonathan on @JohnsonBill on Twitter. And go check out CreditMate if you're in the market for a used bike or more soon.
Yeah.
And that's our show. So Amit, you want to do closing credits?
Yeah, sure. Come and check out our Slack channel. Please come to the website ivmpodcast.com/Shunya1. Over there's a button asking people to subscribe to the Slack. Come and hit the button and we'll send you an invite. And besides that, please go to iTunes and give us some reviews, 5-star reviews. And you know what? Sheila Ditya's promised that if we get 25 5-star reviews on that, he's going to take a picture of himself.
What?
Yes. And I'll make him wear something silly. I'll make him wear a silly hat at the same time.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Great. That's my contribution. Thank you so much, Amit. And that's our show. Thanks. Talk to you next week, guys.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out
IVM Podcasts
to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.